to our participant. Thank you to our participant that was willing to share that. When we do closed captioning with a PowerPoint, it gets just on my screen, so it's really, really tiny. And so I do appreciate sharing the resource so others can enjoy the closed captioning if they need to. Okay, so I will get my screen share here going. All right. Okay, so like I mentioned, we only have 70 slides to go through this time instead of 90. So we will be going at a slower pace and hoping to have much more of a discussion with everyone. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions or put the questions in the chat and we will address those as we move along here. And I can't see the chat. So if you're gonna message anybody, I would please message Annabelle so she can flag me if the question needs to be brought up right away. We will be taking a break today and addressing things that then. We're going to cover IEP goals and progress reporting today. Here's my my name, contact information for the group that I'm a part of, which is the Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. I just want to do a special thank you to our co-sponsors, both the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities and Proof Alliance were integral in getting this program developed so we could provide this beyond just the boundaries of Southern Minnesota, but to the entire state. And so I just wanted to thank both of them. Their resources are available here. The PowerPoint for both last week and this week will be going out, I think, on Monday. So everybody will have that information, but it was also linked into all the registration information as well. All right, conference information. So information today that is being shared is not legal advice. Laws change. Information shouldn't be relied on as legal advice because every case is different. Fact scenarios are different. Children are different. So this is not legal advice. It's just the law and discussion about how to kind of consider the law or look at things, but it's not advice on what you should do in your own particular circumstances. If you're attending this conference with someone else and they haven't registered, please do so. Registration is how we collect emails, and that was how we send out the video link, resources, other information. Like I mentioned, we'll have a 10-minute break around noon. After we come back from that break, we'll address questions for about 5 minutes before we jump into the next topic. And then we will have time at the end of the conference today to talk about other questions that might come up. So hopefully we will be able to address a lot of those, but know that this is the second of 4. So there might be some topics that we'll dive into more down the road in the upcoming weeks here. So if you have questions, like I mentioned, please submit them to Annabelle. She'll be monitoring those. I can't see your questions. My screen is just my PowerPoint right now, so please contact her. And then if you have any technical assistance questions during this presentation, also talk to Annabelle, as I cannot see any of those issues or help you. So Annabelle is here to be your resource. Okay, here's my contact information. My name is Laura Eisner. I am a staff attorney with the Education Law Advocacy Project, and we're part of the Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. My contact information is here. And I just wanted to do a quick introduction of myself for those that weren't present for the last training. I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for 10 years. I was a prosecutor before this. I did child protection, juvenile delinquency, some criminal stuff. A lot of my work for my own personal mission, I guess, or thought processes was to try to make diversion programs and develop methods in place so we had less children going to court. And if we did go to court, that we were, focused on their needs. I switched over to this role in May of last year, and I've loved it. I have learned so much, and I really enjoy the work that I've done, and I wanted to share this information, which is why I'm so happy that we got the funding to be able to do a presentation like this. I have 4 kids. The oldest 2 go to public school, and so I am familiar with the public school process. They love their school. My kindergartner, she's going into 1st grade, she has an IEP for speech, so I'm familiar with that process before I started this role. And my littlest, he is technically 2, but he's just his own person, spent over 500 days in the hospital, in the NICU. And now that he's out, has an IFSP, which is kind of like a pre-IEP, right? It's the family service plan for kids. And so we're familiar with that pathway as well. So those are my experiences, and I just wanted to share that so that I guess people have a little bit of background on me. So what is SMRLS? I talked about SMRLS before, our weird acronym, Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. We are the oldest legal aid program in Minnesota. We provide free, high-quality legal aid to people with low income in critical civil matters. Here's our map of our service area, which is kind of a weird lump of counties. The counties are listed below. We handle a variety of education issues, of course, with our team, but we also do stuff beyond in the other parts of the firm, so family, housing, immigration, government benefits, elder law, etc. Okay, and then I just wanted to talk a little bit about our program in particular, so you know at least some of the work that I have done and why I am able to present on this information. Our Education Law Advocacy Project helps students with a variety of issues in school, and basically you can kind of see it as how the child gets to school, so it's a transportation issue, or attending school itself. So these are a variety of issues that we've dealt with that I've dealt with multiple times over the last couple of years, or last year and a couple of months. And we really expand into anything. So actually I had a case where the student was struggling with some consequences that happened from being part of the high school sports team. And so we will help with that too. Anything getting to the building or in the building, we will work with and try to help families navigate. Okay, so today we are gonna tackle IEP goals and progress reporting. I also want to go into the IEP team because we weren't able to address that last week when we went through so much already, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had that in their back pocket as to what the IEP team should look like. So we're going to cover education terminology, timelines, acronyms. We're going to talk about the IEP team, goal development for IEPs. We're going to talk about creating meaningful and measurable goals, and we're going to have some ones that we're going to read together and kind of dig into. And then we're also going to talk about progress reporting and what that looks like. But first, we're going to just do a short little summary about what we discussed last week so everybody's caught up. Okay, so the evaluation process for the IEP, and it's just a few definitions. So this is our flow chart. It was emailed out and we talked about it a lot last week. So our student is attending school. They are identified either by the parent or the school as a student that might have a disability. It's not on the flow chart because we try to make the flow chart understandable. Otherwise there would be arrows everywhere. But there is often sometimes where the school will reach out and say that they want to have maybe an intervention service in place or try some other techniques before they do an initial comprehensive evaluation for an IEP. That is something that can happen. It doesn't have to happen, and the parents or whoever's making that educational decision or the educational right decision for the child can ask and still push for that initial comprehensive evaluation. After the initial comprehensive evaluation is done for the IEP, either the child would qualify or be found not to qualify. If they don't qualify, school can put together with the parents a 504 plan. Otherwise, we can hop down here to this blue box and this parent can ask for an independent educational evaluation. And this is a private evaluation that is done outside of the school district by outside professionals. If the school agrees to this, the school will pay for it, and the parent and the school would need to talk about how it's set up, when it's going to happen, get releases signed, things like that. If the school disagrees, then there would be a hearing with an administrative judge, and there would be a discussion about why the comprehensive evaluation done by the school is or is not appropriate for assessing whether the child qualifies. So if the child does qualify for the initial comprehensive evaluation, then we go down to the IEP development. That's stuff we'll be talking about today. And we talked about a lot last week as well, but IEP development, there's different categories of things that we pull from that comprehensive evaluation and put into our IEP. The IEP is really multiple documents right? That's how we need to think about it. It is multiple documents together to create this individualized education program. So if some part of the document doesn't match another part of a document, that will cause an issue. And so having that development be thorough and thoughtful is really important. IEP implementation, that's of course when this IEP is done and services begin. And then after that, we have the IEP meetings to discuss progress. And those can happen once a year when you develop it annually, or it can happen more frequently if there are struggles or concerns that school or parent is having. So, and then of course we have to have the comprehensive reevaluation. So every 3 years at least, and it can happen sooner, and it can also be waived, which is the law is a little loose, but every 3 years at least is the comprehensive reevaluation. And the comprehensive reevaluation could result in an IEP development being, kind of reformatted and, created again with the new information. It could also result in the child not qualifying for an IEP. And if you have a comprehensive reevaluation that says that the child does qualify, but you don't agree with it, the parents can then go down to this blue box and ask for an independent educational evaluation. At any point during the year, if this parent or years that we're waiting for this reevaluation to be done, if the comprehensive evaluation that was done that got us to the IEP appears inadequate or not fully capturing where the student is. And for example, we've had a lot of kids that had their comprehensive evaluation done during COVID, right? The throes of COVID, everybody's online. It's really hard to identify what the struggles are. A lot of children had a lot of mental health crises during that part of COVID, and they came out not successful in school, but also with some more struggles. And so if a comprehensive reevaluation should be done earlier, that would be an opportunity to ask for that. And if the comprehensive reevaluation or the prior reevaluation is not satisfactory to what the child needs, at any point during the IEP implementation in those meetings and the IEP being developed annually, the parent can request an IEE. And the school has to respond in one of two ways, right? Either they pay and plan for this IEE or they have the hearing. So that was a lot of our discussion last week in a nutshell. I talked about the comprehensive evaluation a lot, and I want to make sure that we are on the same page with that because we're going to talk about how that plays into our IEP goals. So we use a variety of evaluation tools and strategies to gather relevant functional and developmental information. We also gather information from the parent, information from the student. Sometimes I've had IEPs for teenagers where we're having actual interviews with the student. Anything we can get to help us understand what their struggles are and have it not be so narrowly focused to just one area. The tools and strategies should be designed to assist in determining whether the child is a student with a disability, how the student can be involved with general curriculum. If they're not in general curriculum and we're looking to trying to get them to that, like their comprehensive evaluation or reevaluation in that case, we need to look at how we can make sure that they are involved with their general education peers as much as possible. And there shouldn't be a single procedure, like I said, for the sole criteria for determining if a child is considered a student with disability. We need to have multiple criteria, multiple things that we're looking at to see what the student needs. The instruments that we're using, such various assessments, all these tools that are being used by the evaluators or the assessors need to be sound and like peer-reviewed documents, right? So parents can agree to do informal assessments or, a general review of academic records. That's fine, but typically, at least for getting us going, the comprehensive evaluation should have those technically sound instruments so that we have good data to rely on as we move forward in creating the IEP goals, other sections of that program. The common sections in a comprehensive evaluation includes our information from the parents, background information that we collected from outside providers, or teachers, why we're doing the evaluation. We have our present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And this ridiculous acronym for that is PLAF. And then just kind of a catch-all list of things that we've often seen, but it doesn't have to be. There could be other topics here, but regularly we see academic, intellectual, cognitive, developmental, behavioral, physical, functional, adaptive, and then we'll have our functional behavioral assessment. And that functional behavioral assessment should be tied to behavioral, but if there's other concerns that weren't captured in the functional behavioral assessment, we should have those as well. Just to make sure we have a full picture of that child. Okay, so another definition I wanted to share with everybody today, since we're going to go into the IEP team, is the notice of the IEP team meeting. So notice of an IEP team meeting must be provided to the parents, include the purpose, the time, and the location of the meeting, as well as who's going to be in attendance. This notice must inform the parents of who on the IEP team has knowledge or expertise about the child in a particular way. Like, why are they involved? It shouldn't just be a list of names. They should have their titles as well. And if the parent has English as a second language or doesn't read English or understand English, they must use interpreters or other actions as necessary to ensure the parent understands what's going on in the team meeting. So if you have a parent that you're working with or, is struggling to read, just they don't have that ability or they're dyslexic, just making sure that they are using what the school needs to use what they have in their toolbox to make sure that the parent is understanding what's happening and when things are happening and why. So it just can't be like paperwork being sent to somebody if they don't have the information or they can't read it. That's not taking all actions necessary to make sure the parent understands what's happening. So, okay, so the IEP team. Okay, the school must ensure that that team for each child with a disability includes a parent of the child or parents of the child. And I have my little asterisk here because we're going to define parents. So parents, as defined under federal law, includes all of the following, right? So a biological or adoptive parent of a child, and it's actually noted under the law that this is the presumed parent. So if you have a biological parent that is acting on behalf of the child, but there's also, I don't know, like a grandparent that lives in the home or something like that, it's presumed that the person who's the biological or adoptive parent of that child is the presumed parent if there's multiple people trying to act for that child. And this is making educational decisions under the law, right? So if they're trying to make educational decisions for the law, it's presumed that it's a biological or adoptive parent if there's multiple people interacting with the school, that they should be relying on this biological or adoptive parent. Okay, so it could also be a foster parent. However, there are, it depends on how that falls, and I have resources for you on this. It could include a guardian who's authorized to act as a child's parent. So, for example, there's a thing in Minnesota, it's called a Declaration of Parental Authority. ADOPA is what the acronym is. And so basically a parent can say, okay, right now I'm going to go into mental health treatment, or I'm going on a year-long sabbatical and my mother is going to watch my child, whatever, right? So they can sign this paperwork that says that this guardian is responsible for my child and they're going to make educational decisions for my child. An individual acting in place of the biological or adoptive parent who lives with the child or an individual who's legally responsible for the child's welfare, or a surrogate parent. And then I have information here, surrogate parent resources, PACER, which is in Minnesota, they're a great advocacy organization. They go across the state to advocate for families. They have great resources on surrogates, and actually they have like a video series that would be very helpful for people that are interested in that. I included the link of foster versus surrogate parents. And then MDE, the Minnesota Department of Education, also has information on common questions on surrogate parents. So I just wanted to include that here. All right, so parent involvement, just as a side note, requires that the school inform them of the right to, when the meetings are occurring, make sure that they're being afforded the opportunity to participate in each meeting, to develop, review, or revise the IEP. They have the right to bring people to the meeting if they need extra support. And so they have, it is a key fixture within the IDEA federal law that parent involvement is required and crucial for IEP development. And then, of course, participation. So they must take, the school district must take steps to ensure that parents of the child with a disability are present at the IEP meeting or afforded the opportunity to participate. And this includes setting the notification of the meeting early enough that they will have the opportunity to attend, and scheduling a meeting at an agreed upon time and place. So the school needs to be communicating, and that could be part of that notice of team meetings or pre-communication before that notice goes out about when it works to meet, where they should meet, and just making sure that the parents are able to fully participate with the child's IEP team discussions and as they revise and work on the IEP. All right, so here's the rest of the IEP team now. So we need to have a regular education teacher, not less than one special education teacher. We need to have a representative of the school district who qualifies under these three aspects. They need to have all of these things. So they have to be qualified to provide or supervise design instruction to meet the unique need of children with disabilities. They need to be knowledgeable in general education and knowledgeable about the available resources of the school. And the school IEP team should also include anybody who can interpret the instructional implications of the evaluation results. So after you get your comprehensive evaluation done, who's going to interpret this information and understand this information and be able to explain it to the other teams. Now, it could be other people, right? This could be someone that is actually captured and maybe under the special education role, or if the special education director is coming in and they know, they qualify under number 4. But this needs to be ensured that that's part of the IEP team. At the discretion of the parent or the school, other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the child, and then whenever appropriate, the child with a disability. So I made a little thing here just to help people kind of keep track. You want to make sure you have your in-school service providers. And the IEP team could include more roles, of course, than these. Just asking how people are involved in the IEP team or IEP creation is really important for helping communicating about how the IEP is going to be developed, knowing their resources and their backgrounds. So that's just something that has been beneficial for people, just connecting and making sure they know what each person does and how they know their child and how they're working with their child. Okay. Minnesota has expanded on the IEP team as a requirement for children that have been diagnosed, at least in the school comprehensive evaluation, have a diagnosis on the autism spectrum. And if that occurs, it's under Minnesota rule that they have to have someone who is professional or one professional with experience and expertise in the area of autism spectrum disorder due to the complexity of this disability and the specialized intervention methods. So, and the team must include a school professional who's aware of the range of possible special education eligibility criteria. This is broad, of course, but it is something that is required under the rules, and it's listed actually in the Minnesota rules section under the autism diagnostic criteria. So if you go into this rule, it has like the diagnostic criteria for comprehensive evaluations if they're looking at that, and then down at the bottom it talks about the IEP team requirement. All right, so we need to talk about attendance. There are two options for if a team member is not going to attend on how it can be handled, or two pathways, I guess, that can be brought up to the parent. Maybe I should say that. Two pathways that can be brought up to the parents. One, the school staff who are a member of the IEP team that are not required to attend. If the IEP team is not going to address anything about their curriculum or services, so if you have an IEP team meeting and there's a bunch of services in place, but you're not going to talk about speech and language, right? That's just not going to be touched on at this meeting. Then the school staff can reach out to their special education director and say, like, look, I can't attend this meeting because you have this scheduled when I'm supposed to be with a different student. And then if the parent and the school both agree in writing that it's not necessary that they attend because we're not going to even talk about it, then that's okay. So that's a way to have the person excused. And it could be just for even part of it. If they're going to sit in for the first half, but then the second half they have to leave, there should be some written communication about that excuse staff member. The other option is if they are going to talk about that person's curriculum, they're going to modify some of their services, then there needs to be, if they're not going to attend, the parent and the school must agree in writing and consent to their excusal. And the member who's missing, that team member who's not going to be there, needs to provide their input in writing before the IEP team meeting. So ahead of time, they need to submit this document, whatever they're suggesting or recommending to the development of the IEP and say, like, I can't attend, but here's my input. And then both the school and the parent would need to agree. Now, if they don't agree, then they would just need to reschedule or make it a time where that would actually work for everybody to be there, or split the IEP team meeting into 2 sections so that they can have the appropriate people there when they're doing their discussions. Okay, so writing goals and a thorough IEP is our next thing. So going back to our flow chart. So we have a child that qualifies under our IEP comprehensive evaluation. Then we go to IEP development, right? So our IEP development should include the student's current level of performance, where they are at with whatever the concerns are, where they're at with speech or math, reading, behavioral concerns, social interactions with peers, right? So we need to have a current level of performance. We need to have yearly goals that can be measured, explanation of how these goals will be measured, and when progress reports will be sent out, an explanation of how often the student will be in the regular classroom, their general education classroom versus special education classroom. And then, of course, services when they're to begin, if they're going to take standardized tests, all of that needs to be included in our IEP development. Other things that go into this, the little things, right, like would be included is like transportation. We'll talk about a summer school actually, or extended school year this at the end of the training today. Those are little conversations that we need to have as well during our IEP team development. And just making sure that we know how things are going to play out as we put together this individual education program for this child. Okay, so let's talk about goals. So the goals are skills the child should learn to be successful in school. The IEP team will measure improvement on these goals and provide progress reports. And goals should be set at minimum yearly, right? If they're being met quickly and the child is doing outstanding now that services are in place, maybe the goals are updated. We have that meeting earlier on, but at minimum yearly, we need to have that annual, I'll go back a slide. We need to have that IEP developed annually, just to make sure that our goals are being tracked and we're actually following our progress to see what's being, done by the student, I guess. Goals should be set in a way that we are making sure the child is being challenged at school, but they're also attainable. So we'll talk about that in a second here. Now the goals are based on the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, as well as the comprehensive evaluation. Both of these should identify the child's strength, academic levels, and behavioral needs. Typically, your goal layout looks like this. I've seen it written 1,000 other ways, but this is the most common one that I've seen. A goal layout usually starts with the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, our PLAF statement, where the child is at, right? The student cannot pass 7th grade math, right? Maybe that's dived into more detail, but that would be where we're at right now. The measurable annual goal, what your child needs to have learned by the end of the year is what we're really kind of talking about there. And then we have the benchmarks or short-term objectives. So this is what the child needs to do to get to the annual goal and how progress is going to be measured. So each goal will name a skill or behavior that the child should learn and the progress that the child will make. Each goal will be challengeable but attainable. And we need to think ahead about where that child's going to be in the next year. And we need to explain in that goal what skill is going to be measured and who's going to be measuring it, right? So it's kind of the same thing, but it's just written in a different way just to make sure that we're thinking about it as steps. So I have this goal here. It's for myself. It's maybe not, it's a very short goal because I wanted to make it workable so we could at least go through it quickly. So as outlined in the May 2023 comprehensive evaluation, Laura is unable to consistently read CVC words. Now, CVC words are consonant, vowel, consonant words. So pig, map, cat, I can't read those consistently, right? So here's our goal. By January of 2024, when given 50 written CVC words and a teacher model decoding strategy, such as arm pats. So that's like, this is what you do. You tap your arm as you sound it out. So p-ig, right? So that's our teacher model decoding strategy. That's an example in this. Laura will make the sound of all letters for 50 out of 50 words as assessed by the special education staff. So our goal, which is a very short goal, has the PLAF statement, right? What is our current present level of academic performance? And I can't consistently read CVC words. And we have a goal date, and our goal date is by January 2024. We're going to learn, or I'm going to learn, excuse me, I'm going to learn how to read CVC words, and I'm also going to learn decoding strategies such as the arm pats. Maybe there'll be some other technique that they'll teach me, which should be in my IEP, right? But we'll need to learn not only how to sound out the words, but a method or some sort of tool that will be trained to me, I'll be trained on. And progress will be measured when if I successfully reach this goal, I will make the sounds for all letters for 50 out of 50 words. And the special education staff is going to be measuring that goal. So very short goal, but we have answered all of our questions. Maybe we have more questions too, which we can go into later, but that's at least we have our basic questions answered here. So now if we have any breakdowns for how we're going to work on this, that would go into our benchmarks or our short-term objectives. And actually the benchmarks or short-term objectives can be incremental or can be task-based. And so this is a great tool to use if you, depending on what you're seeing with the child and what their struggles are. So I have an example here. So it could be incremental. So when given 50 written CVC words and a teacher model decoding strategy, I will make the sounds for 13 out of 50 words by December of 2023. And then somehow I'm supposed to jump up to 50 by January, but that's one of my short-term objectives is like just a very incremental phase, and we'll see where we're at with that. Otherwise, we could have more of a task-based where I make the letter sounds. Maybe I'm struggling with saying the letter T properly or R. And so I will make the letter sounds for 25 out of 25 letters by December of 2023. And that will help me reach my full goal in January when I am able to sound out everything with doing my arm pats for those types of words. So those are two options. And the benchmarks or short-term objectives are ways to make sure that we don't have that we have an attainable goal, that the goal is able to be actually reached and we have a plan on how to get there. Okay, so just a summary, the individualized education program is written to ensure that the child reaches their goal, right? So the IEP should have a section on service needs, time for the child. So if I need services on certain technology or maybe tools that will help me learn my CVC words and how to sound them out, that should be in my whole IEP. It should be captured in that document. If I need to have time with a speech teacher or a special education teacher that will help me with my words, that should be in the IEP. There needs to be a statement about least restrictive environment. So maybe I only need to be pulled out to work with a special education teacher, you know, every other day or something like that. And so the least restrictive environment is that I'm going to be in the general education classroom for most of the time, with the exception of a couple pullouts with this teacher, right? And so that needs to be a statement, and we need to have what the school has done to keep me in my least restrictive environment with my general education peers. We need to have information about accommodations, modifications, and supports. So something that might be included would be tools for the parents to take home and work with me on, right? So my mom and dad need to know how to help me. Maybe my general education teacher needs to be taught about whatever is causing me struggles, like if I can't sound out certain words. If there are accommodations such as I won't be asked to read in class until I'm able to do my CBC words, you know, because I don't want to be embarrassed and shut down, right? Whatever that is, that should be in my IEP. Program support for school personnel. Do people need training on my disability? Do they need to have regular communication set up? What does that look like? Statewide assessments. Like I said, maybe there needs to be something where the teachers read me the test, or something's in place to help me support that way. And then depending if there's an issue with the child's behavioral responses, there might need to be a child plan for helping have a positive support plan. So every time I'm asked to read a CBC word, I get embarrassed, shut down, burst into tears, and run out of the classroom. We need to have a positive behavioral support plan in place to help me be successful, stay in the classroom, and continue my work. So what does that look like? And we'll go into that a lot more next week. All right, so IEP implementation. We've developed our IEP. We have our goal for my CVC words, and then the implementation would be first what is going to actually happen? How is my day going to look? And so that's going to be something that will occur on a regular basis, whether it's, you know, the services are going to take me out of the classroom. We're going to have those modifications in place and other supports that will be implemented in the IEP. And so that is where we're at. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So we'll take our 10-minute break now, and then we'll come back and do some questions. Or I can address, there was a question about the different levels of special education between 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I talked a little bit about how the least restrictive environment and how often you're in general education. So we'll go into that a lot more in the dispute resolution section, just because that's when I have time, and a little bit tomorrow, or excuse me, next week. But basically the levels are it's the amount of time that the child would spend in special education away from its peers, away from their peers. So level 3 might be most of their day is in special education, but they do recess or lunch, band or something like that with their general education peers. Level 4 is pretty much all of the time is in that level 4 setting. And then as you go down, the less, like the smaller the number, the less time they're spending in special education. But we'll go into that in more detail. And then there was a question about the requirements for having a parent part of the IEP process. If the parent's not cooperative with the IEP process, what happens? So if the parent is not cooperative with the IEP process and they're rejecting the information for the IEP, the school should be discussing that with them and sorting out what their concerns are. Is it that they don't want to have certain services in place, or what, are they just not showing up for meetings? I know we have some social workers on here from Child Protection. If the parent is not involved because they are dealing with their own struggles, I think that would be a conversation to have with the parent. Like, are you interested in their child having IEP services, but you just can't juggle everything right now? And then talking about that surrogate parent option. But having the parents' input really is important and crucial, because often they're the ones that know the child best, right? They've raised them, they know their struggles and difficulties. But I think sometimes there's also a lot of concerns about how special education kids are treated, or if they're identified a certain way. And so that might be something just to work through with the parent if they are reluctant to be involved. So, all right, so I have another question. So the question is, I have students that I'm working with that have IEPs, but too many absences at school to get tested. So it is difficult to do testing with a student that has significant truancies. Having conversations with the parents or families about that is difficult as well, but that is, so the way that the law is written is that the IEP evaluation needs to be done within a certain time after there's consent. And if the child misses certain days, there can be communication, at least with the parents, or having an agreement about maybe extending just due to the truancies or due to absences. The lack of a presence or attendance with the school could also, I mean, be a flag, right? If there's other concerns, maybe there needs to be some more data collected from private professionals that the child is having mental health struggles and things like that. So that is something to consider in trying to navigate the evaluation. So, and then there was, oh, and then, yeah, there is a particular law, and I'll send it out actually in our email just so you have it, but there is a requirement that someone's licensed in the with school-age children in the area of disability be included on the team. So that is a requirement as well, and that's I'll send that out by email just so everybody has that included. But yeah, the truancy issue is definitely a struggle, and having someone tested in the right amount of time and in the proper methods and having everything completed with detailed information is difficult. But just making sure that those conversations are happening with the team and trying to navigate those situations, I think, is having that open communication is really crucial. But also gathering outside resources, outside information. If there's other evaluators that have done an assessment, the team can rely on some of that information to develop an IEP that would be successful and supportive of that child. So it looks like, Beth, you raised your hand. Do you want to jump in?
I work primarily with Native American families in North Minneapolis. So when it comes to having a parent at the meeting, a good majority of our students are with aunties or uncles or cousins, maybe not have that DOPA in place. So how does that work?
So if you have some sort of documentation that establishes that the adult has legal authority to make the educational rights for that child, then that's who I believe the school would be working with typically, right? If they have but if the parent shows up and they're, the DOPA can be pulled at any time, right? The DOPA is very, very loose, right? And so it can be pulled at any time too. So I would just make sure that you have updated documentation and you know who is making the educational decisions for that child. But the DOPA has been acceptable for me in my cases too. When I've had families that have had significant crises and the child ends up in the care of an aunt, that the DOPA has been accepted by schools as a way to try to get services in place and someone making educational decisions, enrollment even. That was a struggle for one of my parents. We needed the DOPA to get the child enrolled. So I guess I would just make sure that your records are up to date and that if you're talking to the right person and everybody's clear on how that looks. But yeah, it's not uncommon, right? Families rely on each other and have that support that they need. So just communicating with the person that's talking to you about the records that you need to have for your file. I think that would be my first start. And then checking, I don't know if there's some sort of like tickler you can put in your calendar about when to start checking and make sure that has it been renewed, or where are we at with having the document signed. So, and if it's something, this that the parents need more support on, having a conversation with the biological parents about that. Maybe they will submit a letter about needing a surrogate parent, and then you can go that pathway too with that same person if that's what the parent is asking for. Okay, it looks like Jonathan, you have a hand up.
Yes, I was just going to recommend like that educators just assume that there might be accessibility needs on the part of parents, especially when you're dealing with any like neurospicy, neurodivergent kids. Usually it's runs in the family. I know my family is entirely neurodivergent. And just to offer a menu of choices by default for like, here's your selection of things that we can do to make this process accessible. Both so that they can participate and fully, and it makes the whole process a lot less confrontational when you're providing for some of the needs that they might be ashamed to have.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, that's great. I've had families where we've had parents that or grandparents that are illiterate, and they or whether or not they're born in this country or not, we just have had a mix, or dyslexia has impacted some of our families. Other medical issues that just have made huge marks on our parents. And so yes, reaching out and having those conversations about how to communicate and what to share with people, share with their parents to make sure that they can fully be involved, I think is I appreciate you unmuting and sharing that information with us. So, okay, there's a question about DOPA paperwork. Yes, Law Help is a great resource. Thank you for the person that shared that information. They have the paperwork and like a fact sheet on how to like complete a DOPA form. And then you just go through the fact sheet, and then I think you need to have it notarized when you complete it by whoever has the legal rights that's giving you the legal rights, or if you're giving the legal rights to somebody else, you need to have that notarized. So, okay, all right, well, let's go on here to writing good goals. So, all right. So this is just a reminder, we already touched on this. This is what the goals are: the skills that the child should learn to be successful in school. The IEP team will measure improvements on these goals and provide progress reports. And just as a side note, and we talked about this last week, but 504 plans don't have this. This is one of the things that is very different between an IEP and a 504 plan. The 504 plan is just supports. How are we going to support the child? The IEP is we have goals and we have to measure them, right? And we need to figure out how to then share that information that we've measured. Okay, so the goals will be set at minimum yearly, and they could be changed at any time to make sure the child is challenged at school. We have our layout that we've talked about. Okay, so here's an example goal. The present level of academic achievement and functional performance based on the information gathered through a formal evaluation. This is in the future. On September 1st of 2023, the team feels that student is in need of the additional support of reading and writing goal. So they want to have a reading and writing goal, and they're going to actually combine it. And so by May of 2024, student will increase his reading and writing skills from 75% letter recognition, sound demonstration, letter formation, reading of high frequency word and CVC reading, to a mastery foundation of reading and writing skills within the above 90% accuracy. Okay, here are benchmarks for this goal. So by May 24th for all of our benchmarks. So it's actually our benchmarks match our goal. So that's just something to flag for ourselves, right? The student will be able to write uppercase and lowercase letters, pronounce the letter sounds, be able to read 40 high frequency words, read CVC words with approximately 90% accuracy, and write sentences using phonetic spelling. And how we're going to progress towards this, we're going to measure this by collecting informal assessments and student work samples. Okay, so I'm just going to back up so we have it all. Okay, we have our present levels, we have our measurable goal, right? So we have all the categories, benchmarks and short-term goals, and how it's going to be measured. Now you can answer in the chat or you can unmute, but I'm going to ask you, I guess, as we go through this, what was unclear or what do you think is missing? Is anybody willing to unmute themselves or put their answers in the chat? We can start with this first page. Is there anything that you have questions about or that you want to dive into with this goal? One of the things that caught my eye, I guess, when we were looking through this is it has a lot of tasks that need to be completed, right? And they combine reading and writing skills. Maybe that's appropriate for the child, but that is something that caught my eye, right? And then our short-term objectives and our benchmarks are all when the goal is supposed to be done, right? So our benchmarks or short-term objectives actually match the same deadline as our measurable goal due date, right? May 24th, or excuse me, May of 2024, geez. And then with our progress being measured, we have informal samples and student work samples, which maybe these are informal assessments. Maybe these are appropriate, but without having more specific information in our IEP, I don't know who's collecting this. I don't know, like, what is an informal assessment? What does that mean? And what is a student work sample? How often are they going to be collecting this? So does anybody else have anything else that they had questions about with that IEP goal that they wanted to point out? So we'll go into the data collection in a lot more detail next week, but it still is something to flag, I think, particularly for our goal development. So, okay, so having our, again, I just restated this again, we need to have our goal that will have our named skill or behavior that the child should learn and the progress that they're going to make. We need to make sure our goal is challenging but attainable and think ahead about where our child's supposed to be, right? Each goal will explain what the skill is going to be measured and who's going to be measuring it, which we definitely were missing, right? We did not know who's going to be measuring this, or we had the skill because we had the benchmarks, but those all lined up with the due date of the goal, right? And so we have, I think, some questions to ask and figure out, does this actually match what the child needs? So, all right, so I have this one. I'm going to have you guys give me your feedback, and I'm going to read it to you just so everybody can see it because it is that typewriter font. So by January of 2024, student will increase her understanding of social language and usage of social communication to increase her positive peer interaction skills for recognizing nonverbal communication, making social inferences, and reciprocal conversation from occurring in 55 to 80% of trials and document observations to occurring consistently in 70 to 80% of trials and recorded observations during structured activities. Okay, that's our goal. We're going to take our social communication with this breakdown language from 55 to 80% to 70 to 80%, right? We want to bump it up to happening more often. So our benchmarks are going to be this. We're going to have the student, and this is more task-based, right, than that incremental piece. So our task-based benchmarks, our student will identify and explain facial expressions, body postures, and gestures during a variety of nonverbal communication activities in 70% of trials over 3 measuring days observed by the speech and language pathologist. And 2, when in a group of peers, student will turn her body to the speaker, make eye contact while taking at least 2 conversational turns on topics of non-interest by measuring questions and making comments at 80% of opportunities over 3 measuring days as observed by the speech and language pathologist. And then how progress will be recorded is data sheets, observation notes, and parent-teacher report. Okay, now I'm going to put a big, I guess, asterisk next to this goal. I have, so as a lawyer, right, I take direction from my clients, and I have clients that are in favor of their children learning some of these typical neurotypical conversation goals. And I have parents that do not want their child to be like forced into a neurotypical conversation setting, right? And so this is a goal that one parent was in favor of, and for a client, and then we had some different school district, different clients, and the school was proposing something similar to this, and the parent was very much opposed to that, right? And trying to like direct a neurodiverse student into following neurotypical patterns of communication, right? And so I just wanted to put a big asterisk by that, because that is something that obviously parents needed, and professionals, students, staff, everybody needs to consider about whether or not the development of goals are actually meeting what the goals are of the parents and the family, the child, the school, and helping that child be successful. So in this situation, the parent was okay with this, wanted this to be offered to the child to help him be successful, but not everybody would agree to that this is a good goal generally to begin with. Now, beyond that, that asterisk or that note, there are other concerns about this goal that I think that need to be raised with the IEP team. So in the chat, please, or you can unmute yourself if you would like. What do you see in our goal here that is concerning to you, or that you have questions about, that you think is vague? Because if it's not in the IEP, it's how do we know it's going to be followed, right? So we need to make sure we flush out all of the details of our IEP to properly handle and incorporate our goals and our services. And if it's not there, or if it's confusing or possibly vague, what do we address? So does anybody want to unmute themselves and talk? Otherwise I can go through the chat. Yes, eye contact. Yep, I see that is a significant concern for a lot of people. Yep. What else? Anybody else want to take a stab at it or guess? Oh, I went to it. I hit the button. I gave you my cheat sheet. Okay, well, I will, Annabelle, do you have anything in your chat? Should I go to my cheat sheets that I just accidentally showed?
Yeah, I do not.
Oh,
so,
Jonathan raised his hand.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, like eye contact is a big one. Like I would just say that anyone who wrote these objectives needs to read I Will Die on This Hill by Jules Edwards. And like also like just they need to have a basic understanding that they are asking a child to mask, which is going to cost them long term, and push that child towards like chronic PTSD. So these are not good goals that we are building. Being able to give eye contact part of the time when it's useful to help them communicate and useful for the other party. But to figure out how to bridge the gap between them and their peers, or them and there's other adults around them, to figure out how to ask, hey, how can I communicate, or to demonstrate their communication needs, would be a lot better goal to make than to have them essentially speak a second language and expecting somebody to speak a second language instead of finding an interpreter, or like learning to speak each other's languages.
Okay. Great. Anybody else want to jump in?
We do have one in the chat. One comment was whether the student has the tools in place to meet these goals. And just be mindful that clarity via the supports and services listed later in the IEP Act to effectively support the student's ability to meet these goals.
Yeah, that's great. So here, we'll go to my cheat sheet here. Okay, so yes, one thing, like I gave in my disclaimer, there are a lot of reasons that this goal is a significant struggle for various different children that might be neurodiverse, and forcing them to interact in a certain way that that causes them more anxiety or stress, long-term damage, right? And so that is a significant concern. Also, there was other pieces about this that needed to be discussed or be clarified in the IEP. For example, structured activities. What is a structured activity? Is that defined somewhere? Do the parents know what that means and agree and understand what the school is saying when they say structured activities? Is everybody on the same page about that? With the understanding of social language and use of social communication, is it her understanding of it, or is her ability to perform it? Really, I mean, right? That's, I think, kind of the question here is like, is it just her understanding of it, or are we actually performing it? Because she is asked in her benchmarks to do both. And so are we combining too much under this goal? Is it even attainable for somebody that is neurodiverse, or from where we're starting from? So they will have the benchmark that I noted a couple of things here, the variety of nonverbal communication activities. Again, similar to unstructured activities, nonverbal communication activities. What does this mean? Does the school believe that this means something else than what the parent understands? Is everybody on the same page about what this actually means, right? Like, how are we understanding what nonverbal communication activities are? And then 70% of trials over 3 measuring days. So does that mean that they're going to just have 3 measuring days before January, 2024? Is there a different benchmark that we're going to have for this? Because we don't have a date, right? And so are the 3 measuring days going to be in December of 2023? Or are we going to, push them out a little bit to have spaces between them? Is the speech and language pathologist the best person to do this measuring? Like, maybe not, right? And just having those conversations about how we're actually collecting this information and what do the trials look like? It's a lot of questions on what this actually means as the goal. When in a group of peers, the student will turn her body to the speaker, make eye contact, while taking at least 2 conversational turns on the topic of non-interest. Okay, so first off, this person's going to be in a group of peers. How are we collecting data when they're in a group of peers? How are we going to know if a topic is non-interest? And making comments in 80% of the opportunities over 3 measuring days. And that's the same question as before. Like, how are these measuring days going to be set up? How are they going to be actually documented by the speech and language pathologist? If we don't, if they're with their group of peers, if they're at recess, does that count? I mean, how is the person going to be able to collect this data? And then, which we will go into these again in a lot of detail next week, but how are we gathering information? Data sheets. What is a data sheet? Observation notes. Okay, I think I kind of know what that means, but how often is it going to be collected? If we mess up in one of those 3 measuring days, do we get another chance? Like, how does that really look? In a parent-teacher report, they sent this to the parent, and I was like, well, what does that mean to you? And she's like, I don't know. Well, we need to have some communication here as to what this is actually going to be and how the parent's going to share information with the team. If they're actually expected to gather information on their own, which they're not listed in here as a person collecting data, but if they are, how is that going to be shared, right? How is that going to be communicated, and when and why? And there's just a lot of the lack of clarity in developing this goal. Okay, Jonathan, go ahead. I see your hand. If anybody else has their hand raised, they can jump in too after Jonathan.
I was just going to, are they collecting information with neurodivergent peers or regular or neurotypical peers? Because the double empathy problem would be in play here. And your results if you're measuring with a group of like are going to be skewed there.
That's an excellent point. Right. Yes, exactly. And they can't control what a peer does either, right? So it's very loose. um, okay. My chat feature went away. I don't know if anybody chat. Jonathan, do you have anything else? Oh, Joshua, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Well, I was just looking the goal over, and you notice there's a lot of usage of $20 phrases in here. That usage of social communication. We've got positive peer interaction. We've got nonverbal communication, inferences, reciprocal conversations. A lot of uses of this flowery scientific language when more concise communication can be occurring in the written format here. If I was a parent reading some of this stuff, I wouldn't know what any of it meant. Some of our parents don't come from the background that we come from, and it's in addition to how these phrases are weighing in on how we're measuring the ongoing progress too. But that's just my 2 cents.
That's a great point. And actually, when I was taking this, there was a lot more other skills that were listed here. I did like 3 or 4 of them because it was just, I'm like, this is too long. But it was like just extensive about how much the goal was so long. And so the other piece, and again, I don't want to reveal too much about the data collection presentation, which will be next week, but we already have some data on this, and I'm so curious as to what data they collected before as to how we're supposed to get here, because if they've been working on this for a while, which is, I guess, interesting to me, but like they've already have some sort of percentage that they've been working on, and how do we know that they're starting at 55 to 80%? So I think the question really here, like, is it measurable? I don't know. Is it attainable? Probably not, right? And so those are some major difficulties with this, even though it's written very nicely. It's got, yes, like $20 words or whatever Joshua called them. But we have a lot of, I think, struggles with how this is actually going to play out truly when we're trying to get information on how the student is doing. If this is a goal that everybody wants to be, even a goal for the student to begin with. Yeah, the goal isn't written in plain accessible language. Yes, exactly. Okay. And then if we are going to have this goal, for example, we definitely need to have things defined and more outlined and in details. But when we think about then the rest of our IEP, our total program that we're making for the student, we need to make sure that we are having time away with the special education pathologist to learn facial expressions and body posture gestures, that they are taking time to work with the student on these tasks of 2 conversational turns on topics of non-interest, right? And so that would be part of like a service model, like service grid, where they would spend a certain amount of time with the speech pathologist and working on these activities. But also, if we're expecting them to be in a group of peers, on the counter side, we need to make sure that their IEP is developed in a way where they're spending time with general education peers so that they can do that, if that is really our goal, right? And so just thinking about not just this page, not just page, I don't know, 10 of the IEP with goal number 1, it needs to be reflected in everything else of our goal or our IEP to make sure that we really are addressing everything and that the child has the services and supports in place. And if they get stressed out about it, maybe we need to make sure a positive behavior support plan has a plan in place to help them navigate that. So, okay, I have another one here. Okay, So by the end of this IEP year, given prompts and support, student will demonstrate the increased ability to display self-regulation and problem solving from a current level of not advocating in the moment to a level of seeking support within the school day and identifying strategies in 3 different social situations as measured by teacher observations and self-reflection checklist with 80% accuracy. Okay, again, questions about whether or not this is a good goal. Obviously start from the beginning here. We have questions about that, but here are our benchmarks. The student will use self-reflection checklist to identify her own progress and self-regulation and problem-solving strategies and set a new goal for improvement with 80% accuracy in 2 out of 3 check-ins, and when necessary, seek support from teacher or counselor within the school day. Okay, and then the other benchmark objective is given a social situation that triggers an emotional response, student will identify her emotional state, choosing a calming strategy from a provided list and implement the strategy independently in 8 out of 10 trials. And when necessary, seek support from a teacher or counselor within the school day. All right, so a lot of information. What questions or concerns do you have about this goal?
We have one comment that it's subjective and not specific enough.
That is a great observation. Yes. Anybody else want to jump in?
And also, again, does the student have the skills needed to be able to self-advocate?
Great. Yep.
And then another one, what is in the moment in the first, what does that mean in the first paragraph?
Excellent. Excellent observations. Anything else?
Another one, what kind of social situations are they referring to? And when did the IEP year start?
Good. Yep.
And then at school, at home, in the classroom, like where should this development be taking place? Another one, is there any trauma associated with any of the social situations, and how is that being dealt with in the support plan?
You guys are doing excellent. What else?
And then another one, what kind of emotional responses are we talking about?
Good. Yep.
Another one, do they have autism spectrum disorder or ADHD? Oh, maybe that's just a kind of separate
Yeah.
comment. And similarly, anger, anxiety, stress.
Mhm. Yep. Okay. So I could highlight this whole thing, but otherwise, what's the point of highlighting it, I guess? But so some of the concerns that I discussed, this is a little bit modified, of course. I don't use the direct ones pulled 100% from IEPs, but when we discussed this with the parent, prompts and support was a big question. Like, what does that mean? Right? And is there something that's going to guide them on this? Is there a document that the parent could have so we at least know what that looks like? Is it going to be shared with the other members of the IEP team? Or if they're out at recess and they need prompts and support, are the people that do research or recess observations going to be having that information to help them? So we want them to increase their ability to display, which is again showing, not actually having, but that's an interesting language that the parent was concerned about, self-regulation and problem solving. So again, this is kind of an overall part of their day. And so it's difficult to say that this is actually going to happen at certain points of the day. If they're really struggling already, having a display of this happen throughout the entire day just seems unmanageable or unattainable. Maybe we need to have a display of problem solving or self-regulation, if that's language is even going to be in there at a certain point in the day, right? So we at least have it narrowed down. Otherwise, how are we going to measure this throughout their entire day? Yeah, and not advocating in the moment. How are we supposed to know when this actually happens, right? If the if no one's around, if it's at recess or lunch, how is she supposed to advocate in the moment? And how are we supposed to document that? How do we know what's not happening in the moment? So seeking support within the school day, I think that at least is something that could possibly be measured, but we need to have somebody that's designated, right? Who is this going to be? Is it from a teacher? But is just like a vague, like, is it elementary school teacher? You got one teacher, or are we in high school? Which in this case, we were in high school. So who is your teacher that you're actually seeking support from? And you're supposed to get this information gathered from teacher observations, but then she could check in with a counselor at a benchmark, right? And so this benchmark here of checking in with a counselor within the same school day isn't going to be recorded because we have it measured by teacher observations, right? So we don't even gather this information. If she has like a counselor that she's supported with and is seen all the time when she does have struggles, how are we going to actually measure that? We don't even know she's going to be doing that because no one's collecting that data, because the data is being collected by teacher observations, and she wasn't, at a school where she had multiple teachers, right? And she's supposed to be identifying strategies in 3 different academic and social situations. We were not even at that point of identifying strategies. So that was our main objection, is how are we at this goal when we need to identify it. We need to have a goal where we work on identifying strategies, or working with her on even understanding what a strategy is before we can have her identify them. So this is a goal that was set up for failure, but I don't think it was intentionally done that. I think they were just had some grand plans for her, but she was not ready. And then we need to use a self-reflection checklist, and no one was able to answer that question about actually what that was to the parent when we were in the IEP meeting. When they were talking about this goal, we had to request it again. We have no information about this, and whether it's actually written in a way that she could understand and digest the information and complete it. So a self-reflection checklist is maybe workable, but it needs to be written in a way where the child can understand the information, respond to it, feel like it's confidential as well, right? That's really important for if they're going to be doing self-reflection. And she's supposed to identify her own progress in self-regulation and problem solving, which is interesting. But then also she's supposed to, what was she supposed to do with her self-reflection checklist? Identify strategies as part of that, right? So I don't know if the self-reflection checklist has that as a bottom, like strategies to identify, or what it looks like, because we never got that document. Okay. And she's supposed to set a new goal for herself with 80% accuracy in 2 out of 3 check-ins. And I don't know what that means. Who's checking in? How often? What's the 80% accuracy? So she's going to set a new goal, and then they're going to check in with her. Is it the teacher or is it the counselor? And how do we know if she's going to be accurate? Is it going to be looking at her self-reflection checklist, or what are we doing? And then given a social situation that triggers an emotional response, I think someone had raised, what is an emotional response? That is a great question. What is the social situation? Are teachers and counselors always going to be there when that happens? Student will identify her emotional state, which that's a question, parent said she wasn't ready for that. Use a calming strategy, which she was never taught from a provided list, which we didn't have, and implement a strategy independently in 8 out of 10 trials. But independently also means, how is she going to be doing this? Who's going to be measuring this? If it's her, is she doing her own data collection? And not to say that shouldn't be able to do it eventually, but we need to give her the steps to get there. And to do this independently, it also requires her to have skills that she never had. Also, if she was able to do it with somebody else, I think that would be okay as well. And so when necessary, seek support from a teacher or counselor. Again, we have the counselor as a resource, but not someone that collects the data for us. And this goal, as a side note, didn't have the necessary data collection piece down below. It actually lumped it into this first paragraph. So we got some more feedback here. The goal feels very vague for the school report success without being any. By measuring goals, like you aren't measuring each social interaction every day. That's true, right? Or like ones you dysregulate in. Is there a backup person if the teacher and counselor are not available? That's a great question. That's something that needs to be brought up. If there is a support teacher too, we can list that. And I'm not totally disregarding this goal. Maybe at some point she would be ready to do some of this, but there needs to be also a lot of definitions and clarity for the IEP team. Everybody needs to know what their role is and what's being done, so that we can help her reach her goal. Whoops, sorry. And why are there no goals related to body mirroring or peer co-regulation? So there are some just difficulties, and the parent did end up rejecting this IEP because, I mean, there was some other concerns, but there was a lot of concerns with this one goal that was developed. Okay, so this goal actually had another benchmark that I lumped over here because it was a little bit different, even though they put it all together. So they put this kind of emotional support goal together with also academic tasks. And so I separated it for our own conversation. I think that if we're trying to get an academic goal in place, even if it is an academic, like we're trying to navigate stressors of academic tasks, I think just having it separate so that we understand like what we're trying to achieve is helpful. So this is the same measurable goal as this one, as the top one, right? But it's just benchmark 3. Benchmark 3 is when faced with a challenging academic task, the student will break down the task into smaller steps, identify potential obstacles, and generate 2 possible solutions to the obstacles with 80% accuracy in 3 out of 4 trials, and when necessary, seek support from a teacher or a peer within the school day. Okay, does anybody have any feedback on this benchmark for our goal that we just talked about? You can unmute or raise your hand or jump on the chat. Anybody? Oh, I tried to bring down my chat feature. Okay, so I can jump in here. Similarly, right, we have the
sorry, Laura. Jonathan actually pointed out it's another instance where they're measuring every academic task and only flagging the ones that cause issues.
yes, great.
And then Beth pointed out that to me, it feels like this would take the student way longer to do the task.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts or questions? Anything about this? Okay, well, I'll go to the next slide here. So, okay, so again, the concern, one of the concerns we had with this is that it's going to be measured by teacher observations and self-reflection checklists. However, this is a goal where she's supposed to be doing it all by herself, or benchmark, I should say, that she's doing it all by herself, and seek support from a teacher or a peer, which the peer is not going to collect data on her. I mean, so I don't know if she's supposed to then report to the peer later. So the student will break down the task into smaller steps, identify potential obstacles, generate 2 possible solutions to the obstacles. With 80% accuracy in 3 out of 4 trials, we have no idea how is she going to show that she did this. She also doesn't have this is a side note, but she didn't have the skills to do this yet. So we needed a support to help her figure out, like, organize her thoughts, organize her, like if it is a larger project that has a due date in a couple weeks, to work with her on that and show her how it could possibly be done, give her options. And so, but the goal itself is missing how any of this information is going to be collected, because she's supposed to do it by herself. Because it's only when necessary she seeks support from a teacher who may be collecting data on observations, or a peer who definitely does not know about her IEP goals or shouldn't. So it is just another concern. Plus it was added in with all the social emotional self-regulation stuff, which just was confusing and didn't really touch on this ability to do self-regulation. I can see that it gets the problem solving, but if we're going to do problem solving in an academic setting, we should have it be a separate goal, at least so that people understand what they're doing and why they're collecting data. And that's another question, of course. What is, if the teacher knows what they're collecting, if they're doing teacher observations and they're just going to write like an email to somebody, hey, she checked in with me or whatever, do they know that they're collecting data on academic tasks plus social emotional support? Do they have that information? And that would be a conversation to have with the IEP team. Okay, here we go. This one was one that I had last year. I've slimmed it down a lot and changed it a little bit so that it's not clear, but I'll read it to you. We have two goals here. By December of 2023, student will improve her regulation of emotions across all school environments from 33% to 80%. Data will be collected by the special education teacher for her improvement of regulation emotions. Okay, and then the other goal is by December of 2023, student will attend class and stay in class from 34% of the time to 80% of the time. And the benchmarks for that one is the student will be persistent on difficult tasks at a rate of 80%. Student will work cooperatively with others at a rate of 80%. Student will complete assignment at a rate of 80%. Student will advocate for her needs at a rate of 80%. Data will be collected by the special education teacher. What concerns or questions do you have about these two goals? And you can raise your hand or enter it in the chat. All right, Jonathan, it looks like you have your hand raised.
The goals seem like they may be in conflict. Like advocating for her needs, like if I don't know this particular student's like needs or sensory profile, but like if you're particularly sensitive to fluorescence or something else that's in the classroom, like the classroom might hurdle quite a bit. Or like if you're hyper acoustic or have hyperacusis like I do, like most normal classrooms are frankly hell to be in. So you're asking the student maybe to be in an environment that is hurting them quite a bit. And then you're asking them to advocate for themselves. So what are you expecting from this person?
That's a great point. Yep, good. Anything else? Do we think that this goal is obtainable? We're going from 30s in the 30 percentile range up to 80% within just a few months. Or any other concerns about this that you want to bring up? Annabelle, do you have anything in your chat before I show my screen?
Sorry, I do not.
Okay, all right, so I'll go to the next one. Okay, so again, this is when I could have highlighted the whole thing. About our concerns, at least from the parents' perspective. So we're going to improve her regulation of emotions across all school environments from 30% to 80%. That's just a giant jump. It's not obtainable. If we're really struggling that much from regulation and they're seeing her dysregulate on a regular basis. And across all school environments is a huge also leap for somebody, right? If we're expecting maybe we can ask that we work on regulating of emotions in the special education classroom or general education classroom or recess, whatever, right? We have some sort of plan or thought as to how that's going to look, but of all school environments with such a significant leap, is a concern, right? And so if we set her up for this, there's no way she's going to meet this goal. And the data will be collected by the special education teacher, which is also a concern if she's supposed to be regulating her emotions in all school environments. The special education teacher is not going to be in all school environments. So how is it really going to be collected? Are people going to be sending her emails so the special education teacher can put together the report? How do we ensure that this communication is happening? And of course, if we're maybe it's kind of a given, I guess, given the percentile, she did not have the skills or abilities at this point to regulate her emotions across all school environments, right? We needed a more step down from this goal on working on that first before we had it that she was just going to regulate her emotions. If we're at 33%, we're supposed to be at 80%. That's just a giant jump, and she did not have the skill set to have that significant of a leap. Okay. Our second goal, the student will attend class and stay in class from 30% of the time to 80% of the time. The benchmarks for this objective actually were 8. I slimmed them down and I pulled out my favorite one, which is the student will be persistent on difficult tasks. I have no idea how anybody is measured on persistence. How is that even documented? I think that is just a phrase that is encouraged. Like you want someone to be persistent, but like that's so subjective that an objective way to collect data on this is just impossible, in my opinion. So working cooperatively with others, if they're working with peers, how are they going to collect that information? And if she's in the general education room, the data is supposed to be collected by the special education teachers. So how are we getting that information across to the SPED teacher? They're going to complete work assignments. I think that's something at least we can figure out how well she's doing that, but that doesn't actually tie to our goal. Our goal is that she's going to attend class and stay in class. Are these assignments that are solely given in class that she has to hand in by the end of the day? You know, and maybe it's we need to have more breaks. And if it is that where she attends class and stays in class and she has to complete the assignment by the end of the day, are we cutting off her special education resource room when she needs to go out and get resources from her support team, right? And advocating for her needs, again, it kind of goes back to the other one too. Her needs are her needs. It's subjective, and to know how she's advocating for her needs is asking someone to collect objective data on a subjective desire or need, right? And so we don't know what her needs are at a rate of 80%. And if she asks for one thing, does that say maybe she advocated one day but not the next? Maybe she didn't need anything the next day. You know, like we don't have that information. It's just language in there to try to say that she should do this stuff and that we want her to achieve these rates and these, you know, percentages without actually making it achievable for her. Also, there was a lack of supports throughout her IEP, right? Again, everything in our goals should be supported in our program, right? It should be matching, like advocating for her needs. Okay, maybe we've already taught her that and she has those skills, but if she forgets them, she needs to be able to access and use a pass card to go to the resource room to talk to her favorite teacher, right? Or again, I think the other ones are very subjective, especially the persistence piece, but if there is something in there that we can maybe work around, if we know what the school's objectives are or their plan for helping her reach this goal of attending class and staying in class, you know, we can develop benchmarks to start working towards that goal. And having to jump from 34 to 80% is just almost asking for, in such a short period of time, is asking for a lot of supports to be in place. And so we need to really make sure that our IEP has those supports for her. The student also had a hall pass. And so there is nothing in here or any language in here that says that she can miss class if she's using the hall pass to take a break, go, you know, on a walk, go to the counselor's office, all of that, that's not included in our goal, right? And so we have information here that is pushed out as our goals to try to help the child reach them, you know, but there are services that were also in the place in the IEP that weren't incorporated into our goal, into our objective language. So All right, I'm going to head on to progress reports because we have 15 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about goals before we go to progress reports? So I guess in summary, I'll say, and we can address the questions at the end, of course, too. But in summary, I'll say, when we're working on a goals, it's really important that the IEP team, school staff, IEP team parent staff, and whoever else is attending that's working with this student truly understands and communicates about what's being requested, right? And what's being in the document, because the miscommunication of what's being expected or how data is going to be collected or who's doing what is what causes a lot of issues and frustrations in school, right? So just having that communication, and some of this might be cleared up if we have that communication. Some of it might not be, and we might need to add more information in our IEP to make sure that it is clear to everybody who puts their hands on our IEP that they know what to do and when. And just having some of these goals be so broad or subjective is a way to make it so that schools and families kind of get into a bind where they feel really frustrated about how progress is happening when we're not collecting the right data, we're not looking at the right things, we're not giving the student the right tools, services, accommodations, programming, time in special education room or time in general education room to actually help them be successful. Okay, all right, progress reports. So how do we know if our services and supports are properly in place to help our student reach their goals? We get our progress reports. So progress reporting, the IEP must include a description of how the child's progress towards meeting their annual goals will be measured, right? So we have those data reports, right? We have that in the goal. And the progress or the periodic reports on progress that the child is making towards meeting the annual goals will be provided. So we need to know when, how, what it's going to look like, right? And the federal law has this little parentheses in it, such as through the use of quarterly or other periodic reports concurrent with the issuance of report cards. So here is how progress reports will be done. I've pulled these from a couple IEPs, and usually it's on the first page of your IEP, right? How and when progress towards the annual goal will be reported. Progress will be reported to parents in a written format 4 times a year, with 1 being the annual individual education plan. This is another one. Indicate the frequency and method which with the students' goals or progress on goals will be reported to the parent/guardian. Frequency of IEP progress reports is missing. The number of reports written, there's going to be 3. Annual IEP present level statements served on as 1 progress report, no. So I don't know if they're not going to do it or if that doesn't count as a progress report to them. Additional information. That was blank. Okay, here's another one. All right. So this one actually indicates, so if you compare, this formatting should have how often they're going to go out and it's missing, right? We have nothing here when the reports are going to go out. Indicate the months which the progress report will be issued. Here we have March, June, and November. There's going to be 3 of them. They're not going to do the present level statement as the progress report. And again, I just assume that that means that that's not going to count as a progress report, but they're going to get it, but we don't know. So that would be a question that we would have for our IEP team. Additional information regarding the progress report. This one actually had down below that the progress reports are going to be sent at the same time as the report cards. So it, and then this one is another one that I pulled from a different one. Progress will be reported 3 times a year in writing, 2 written progress reports, and an annual IEP team review of the IEP. So we're going to have 3 written reports and an annual team. Oh, does someone have a question? Okay, an annual team review of the IEP. Okay, so progress reports, reporting doesn't have to match up with the report cards. We've had some pushback. It doesn't have to. There's actually a case that just says that the periodic progress reports has examples that it could go with the report cards. It doesn't have to. It could come more often. It could come staggered for the report cards. It doesn't have to be part of that. And the annual IEP team meeting, often, unless you have paper in front of you with documentation on the report, doesn't actually qualify as a progress report, right? So our progress report, I'm going to go back just a couple pages. It's supposed to be a periodic report on how the child is working on their annual goals. And so if they're going to give you a report before your IEP meeting, the school has created this before your meeting to just say like where you're at, that would qualify, but technically just having the meeting isn't a report and doesn't qualify. So, okay, so the purpose of data collection in the IEP, we'll talk about this again next week. Like I said, collecting data will ensure that the services and support offered to your child are helping them make progress and reach their goals. Data collection should be individualized, and the data collection should be focused on that goal for that child, right? And so that's where we went through the goals. It said like how things are going to be collected and how we're going to put it together. The special education teacher is going to get the information, or we're going to have the reflective chart, whatever that is, they're going to gather that, and that's going to be our data that they're going to use to put together a report on if our child is meeting their goals. Okay, so here's an example of a progress report. Basically, it's a decoding fluency skill level. They're going to bump up from 25% of the time of being able to do some blendings, ending sounds in isolation, things like that. They're going to move from 25% of the time up to 75% of the time. So, and then this report was done. So their goal is in November, or our deadline, I should say, our deadline for our goals in November 2022. So January, get a report on the student. They say he's making adequate progress. So given grade level first 100 high frequency sight words, student will recognize and read words learned at 75% accuracy, blah, 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 right? So this is like one of the objectives or benchmarks for that. And then we have just a note here that student has increased his recognition of high frequency sight words from a level, actually, there was a gap. There was no information there, from a level of whatever. We didn't have the full report, to 30%. So it sounds like they worked with him on some high frequency words. And this was their goal, was to get up to 75% accuracy. They've been having the data collected by the special education staff, which was nice. They put all this information here so we knew exactly what was going to be collected. And then this, we have a note here. We don't actually know where he started from, probably 25% because that's up here, but you know, that's not actually in the report, to 38%. So we know he's made some adequate progress. That's what they've checked here. That's, at least that's their position, right? And I guess, Jonathan, I see you have a question in the chat. That would, if they're measuring the font for reading, that would be a question that we would have as part of the development of that IEP goal, right? Are they doing it in sans or Times New Roman, whatever? What are they putting it in so that the student can read it? And how is it being actually provided to them? So, and those are questions that you can ask once you get the progress report, reaching out, and I'll talk about this in a second here in more detail, of course, but the reaching out to the staff who did this collection of data and getting information on that, if you didn't already ask about that in your goal development, would be good. Like, is he just having struggle reading? Maybe you have it in cursive, you know, and he can't read cursive, right? We need to know how they are sharing the information and how they're collecting the results of their testing. Okay, here's another one. All right, student will increase his ability to appropriately respond to adults and peers, from responding with swearing, name calling, or refusal, to complying more than 75% of the time, to being able to respond, swear. So basically he has outbursts, swearing, name calling, refusal, more than 75% of the time, and they want it to have him actually flip and be compliant 75% of the time. So he's at 25% basically, right, of compliance, and they want him to be at 75%. So they wrote it in a weird way. That's just another side note. But they mentioned here that the child was had adequately made progress. But here is the concern that we had about this progress report. Student has numerous incidences where he's become verbally aggressive towards staff. And I deleted some of their examples because I didn't want to put a bunch of swear words out there. But they had listed examples. And even has gotten physically aggressive, pushed 3 different staff members. When redirected, student will either walk away or swear at staff. The staff have tried to implement the plan to call student's parent when he acts this way so they can talk, but he refuses to stay where he is and walks away. Student has had a few days where he is respectful to adults, although he has done 0 schoolwork, which is not relevant to our goal. And when the student leaves the classroom to wander the halls, he engages in verbal aggression. A meeting was scheduled for March 20th, 2023 to discuss changes to students' plan, but parent was unable to attend. Another meeting is being scheduled. So some of this is helpful. At least we know that he is still struggling with this goal, although there are questions about how it's being implemented, right? But we have this goal, right, that he's going to be able to respond and comply. And compliance is a good question. Someone put that in the chat. What is compliance? That is a very good question for this goal. So what he has this is his goal. His goal is to stop swearing, name calling, refute, and comply more than 75% of the time. So then we have this response here from the school that says he's making adequate progress first, which it seems like actually they're saying he hasn't, right? Because of the information that they've shared. And then they talk about schoolwork, which is not part of this goal, and that the parent didn't make the last meeting. So none of this actually really ties to the progress report. At least the meeting part doesn't, and the schoolwork doesn't. And so it just seems like there's extra and additional information in there to that's beyond what's being asked, and that maybe adequate progress shouldn't have been checked, but insufficient progress should have been checked if that's really is their concern. Further, and kind of going back to our goal development, we have a very unclear or irregular collection of data, right? I mean, we have a few people that have collected data and shared information, but we don't have, like, maybe 75% of the time he is okay. And it's just, we have these irregularities, right? So we have just a summary here. And so when we get to the data collection next week, we will talk about how kind of looking through that data and understanding what is being collected is so crucial for developing our progress reports. Okay, here is just my summary on the progress report piece. So if you have a progress report that's unclear or shows a lack of progress, steps to do as someone that's reviewing that report would to review the goals of the IEP to see if those goals were addressed in the progress report. We're talking about no homework being done. That's actually not a goal, right? Maybe the swearing and inappropriate responses to the teachers were, right? But the other things that were added were not. So were those goals actually addressed in the report? And how are the goals being measured if we have that information? Reach out and talk to the author of the report. How did they gather this information? What did they put together in it? What did they find relevant? Having that conversation and having good communication with the school, even if you disagree with the information, is really crucial to making sure that just you understand what's going on and the school is able to communicate with you about their concerns as well, right? Having that open flow of communication is important. Depending on that conversation, requesting an IEP meeting to address concerns or issues such as gaps in the goal, gaps in data collection. Maybe the progress report actually doesn't address anything that is tied to the goal. Having that meeting is crucial, and talking with the team. And just some questions to bring up. Do we have goals or measurements that need to be changed? Maybe it's we have a goal that's unattainable for our child right now. We need to break it down to something that's more attainable so he can get to the goal that you want to have him at, which would be to have him in class or not swearing at students or peers or teachers, right? Does the entire IEP team agree and understand what the goal is? And what is the information that's being gathered? Do we all agree with that? And how it's being done, what it looks like? Do we need to start talking about extended school year if we're really not meeting our goals and having struggles? Okay, so I just want to put a quick note about extended school year. If there's lack of progress in a particular area, the school district must ensure that extended school year services are available and as necessary to provide FAPE. And FAPE was a word we talked about, or an acronym, I guess we talked about last week. That's free appropriate public education, right? And it's part of IDEA. So do we need to have summer school set up for this child to help him monitor, work on his behaviors or emotional regulation? Maybe he's behind in a lot of academics as well. Do we need to have FAPE? Or in order to provide FAPE, do we need to have an IEP that would cover this extended school year? And it's called ESY in your IEPs. So ESY must be provided only if a child's IEP team determines on an individual basis and in accordance with the idea that services are necessary for the provision of FAPE to that child. So having that meeting and discussion with the school is important. The communication about this, some parents have come to me where they're like, the school won't offer, you know, emotional or supportive behavioral support during the summer. But if it's a goal in the IEP, that is something that should be incorporated in with the school year. So, okay. What questions do you have? We went through a lot again, and we're at 1 o'clock. So if you have anything, you can hop on or type it in the chat. Yes, great. Jonathan brought up a good piece here with the last report. Maybe we need to have some educational supports for the staff that's working with the kid, right? Like that would be a good question for the team. If they're seeing all these behavioral responses, they're really struggling with getting him to stay in the area. What do we need to have in place in part of the IEP team to offer him support? And that could include training our staff members on his responses. If it's PTSD and he has this response of walking away or whatever, right? That we have that in place. So, okay.